Not paying attention.
Well, thank you for waiting, though. Appreciate that.
We all ready to go?
Yes, sir. You think?
Okay. I'm going to call the work session to order for June the 2nd, 2020 at 4:32. Now in order. Let me call the roll. Councilmember Nakamura.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Lindamood.
Here.
Councilmember Wheat.
Here.
The mayor is here. Councilmember Dodson. I see you. Can you hear me? George, can you hear me? George.
You sleep.
I don't think he can hear me.
George.
Oh, try again.
George, it's muted. It's showing to be muted. I don't know who's. Can you hear me, George?
Chris.
Chris.
That goes.
All right.
Okay, yeah, I can hear you.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Councilmember
It's
Kelly
okay.
Here.
and Councilmember Rigney.
Here.
Great. So we're all here. So we're starting early at 4:30 today because we have a number of items on the agenda. And we're going to start with Budget 101. About time we learned about that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. I'm Kyle Lester, Finance Director. This afternoon, we're going to discuss our budget process in preparation for the next meeting when we get into the numbers and a little bit of the nitty-gritty here. And I'll try and make this as brief as possible, given that we're kind of looking at a long meeting.
Kyle, I'm having trouble hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you'll need to keep close to the mic.
Yep. Okay, will do. So the three basic subjects we're going to cover tonight, first is pretty much just a background for our budget information, the process and the components from start to finish, and then, of course, our tax rate background and some of the process there. So let's start by briefly going over some of the major funds at play, what they do, and, of course, how we use them. The most commonly discussed ones are going to be our operating funds. We're all very familiar with those: general fund, utility, drainage, and debt service. And three of those four house the bulk of our personnel and overhead costs. And of course, we do present on those each month, so we're all very familiar. Most of our discussions, of course, will revolve around the general fund and these other funds as well, and we will formally adopt their annual budgets in September. They aren't the only ones that have an annually adopted budget, though. We do have our CEDC and CCCPD funds, both funded through a half-cent sales tax. The caveat here is that they are governed by boards of directors, so the process is a little different. The meeting with the CCCPD boards are set to begin this month, with the budget being adopted in early July. CEDC is set to be adopted on August 11th. We do have several funds that are associated with our capital improvement plan. We budget for those a little bit differently, given that those are projects that span 5 years and are generally very expensive. So each year we present an updated version of a 5-year capital improvement plan.
Pardon me one second. Mark, could you move that window up to the top so people that may be watching this can see the whole slide? Can you do that?
Chris may have to in the back. Because what's projecting on mine is.
Oh, okay. Well, we're working out where you're talking, Kyle.
All right. And so we will, in conjunction with our budget process over the next couple of months, we will bring forward an updated 5-year capital improvement plan list with all the list of the plans that, with the projects, major projects that we want to move forward with in the next 5 years. Council still has control over that spending, but it doesn't have an annually adopted budget since they're multi-year projects. And the last category at play are funds with legally restricted purpose and scope. The largest is our TIF fund, and we, of course, use that strictly for capital projects. That fund should be around for the next 10 years. We also have various smaller special revenue funds. Examples here would be hotel-motel tax. That can only be used for expenses related to tourism, park and dedication funds, court technology, and security funds. Part of what I've concentrated on in this budget cycle is trying to efficiently utilize these funds before we try and dip into our general fund and sort of move some of our spending around in ways that we're legally allowed to in order to reduce the need to raise property taxes. Did I lose power?
Right, that's right.
There it goes.
Hey, all right. Okay, so we report on the city's financials in two different ways. The first one is our budget book. It's what we'll release late this year after we adopt our budget. That's really designed to be sort of a communications device, a policy device. There are of course, financial components to it, but it's really designed for someone who may not have really in-depth financial experience or background to be able to read through. The second is sort of the opposite. It's our comprehensive annual financial report. It looks at the previous fiscal year as opposed to looking ahead, and it gets published in spring of every year. Its focus is solely financial, and it reports on the most recently closed fiscal year, as I mentioned. There are strict guidelines that we have to adhere to in order to properly represent the city's financial position, and we contract with an external auditing firm, Weaver, to make sure that we do that correctly. And so it contains a record of actual revenues, expenditures, depreciation expense, and the value of all of our assets, financial or physical. So two very different documents, but very, very important.
Kyle?
Yes,
Just
sir.
Just real quick note, so the second document, the CAFR, is our audit.
That is
And
correct.
So a lot of times people use those terms interchangeably.
Yes, I'm sorry, a comprehensive annual financial report. So yes, audit. As I said earlier, you as our mayor and council will formally adopt our budget. We can amend that budget mid-year, but again, you have to authorize that. We try to avoid doing that as much as possible. And most importantly, you also set the tax rate each year before adopting that budget. And then you will also adopt a 5-year capital improvement plan by resolution. A little bit about our fiscal year. We run from October 1st through September 30th. At the end of every fiscal year, we inevitably have budget savings. And so what we want to do with most of those is to amend our budget to move those savings over into capital funds. As with a lot of our financial maneuvers, the goal here is to help keep our annual tax rate low and maximize the revenue that we currently have, as opposed to relying on next year's taxes. Anything not spent and anything not transferred into our CIP will drain into our fund balance, and that must be reappropriated by council to be used. So our budget process, it really goes public around this time of year in the summer, but it truly begins months before that. We start in February, where we go over the budget calendar with council.
Sorry, Cal, let me interrupt you
Yes,
one
sir.
second. A while ago, when we were working on this format, there was a point where you had George off to the right, and then I think that's better use of the screen, because then the whole presentation was off to the left. Yeah, and that bottom menu, that's actually better, I think. Okay, thanks.
And so once our major dates are set with our budget process, we move forward getting everything ready for council to look at it. And that internal process runs from March through May. It starts with what we call a budget kickoff. We review the steps in our budget process. We go over those important dates, distribute materials, and really set the overall tone for this year's budget process. Departments then begin preparing their budget submissions. They review the current line item detail, and they can subtract or add where they need it, so long as their overall department budget does not increase, and their service levels can remain the same. Departments will also submit any additional funding requests, revenue estimates for fees and charges, capital improvement plan requests to our budget team, and the budget team consists of the city manager's office, finance, and HR. And once our budget team has every department submissions, we go through them with a fine-tooth comb. We flag any unused or underused accounts, as well as ones that usually exceed budget. We'll take a look at the itemizations in each account to make sure we're coding them properly. And then we do a preliminary analysis on any additional requests or revenue estimates. The next stage in our process would be meeting between the budget team and every department to go over this information. Go over all of our line items, break apart funding requests, discuss capital improvement needs. And part of the purpose for doing this year, as I mentioned earlier, is to identify any costs that can be funded through our restricted revenue sources, again, alleviating pressure off of our general fund. We also identify items that we could fund out of this year's budget with savings. So once these meetings are completed, the budget team finalizes the proposed budget and tax rate for submission to council in August. From this point on, all major budget discussions take place in a work session like this, until we adopt a budget and tax rate in late September. And then we start it all over again in February. It's a lot of fun. One thing to touch on is our process for replacing our vehicles. As you're all aware, we have a new contract with Enterprise Fleet Management to help us manage our vehicle replacements. This list of replacements gets updated in the April-May timeframe every year. Each year, we commit to a minimum of about $680,000 toward current and future vehicle replacements through this fund. And we do this by transferring money from general fund, the CCCPD fund, and utility and drainage funds. And so with the help of Enterprise, we've begun projecting out replacements for about 5 years, along with expected trade-in value, that helps us treat vehicle replacements as the capital investments they are, rather than trying to fund them on an annual basis. Police patrol vehicles typically expected to last somewhere in the 3-year range. Fire apparatus can be 5 years plus, depending on the type of apparatus. And all other vehicles are considered on a case-by-case basis in conjunction with Enterprise. Although we, of course, have the freedom to keep them longer if there are no major maintenance issues. And conversely, ones that are maybe not as old but are problematic maintenance-wise, we'll put those on the list in an accelerated basis as well. There are other replacements as well that we have to pay attention to. Specific equipment, PPE that we need to make sure that we keep up to date. For instance, police handguns and tasers are rotated out, as are in-car computers. We have fire air packs and other PPE for that department, as are our technology and building system needs across the city. And all of these are handled through a combination of departmental budgets, and we do utilize our vehicle and equipment replacement fund in a limited capacity for those. So the proposed budget will be formally presented to council in early August. Leading up to it, we will have another work session on June 16th. That one is we will dig into the preliminary numbers as well as our health insurance proposals. On July 7th, we'll discuss that 5-year CIP and improve our insurance contract. And by July 31st, you should have a physical copy of the proposed budget for you to review. Again, we'll formally do a presentation on that on August 4th. So the last thing I'd like to touch on today is our tax rate. So as all of you are aware, this will be the first tax year that Senate Bill 2 comes into effect. And it did change our process a little bit, as did the COVID pandemic. But in general, our property tax process is governed by a state law known as Truth in Taxation. This law sets out calculations for the no new revenue and voter approval rates. I'll define those in just a moment. Outlines public notices, public hearings, and even some language in our budget document. The Tarrant County Appraisal District is the entity that actually appraises property. And we have received preliminary information from them that indicates a decent amount of new development hitting our tax roll. Actually would be able to hit our general fund side, which helps us. But we will receive another estimate in June and our final one in July. So in the meantime, we're just being nice and conservative with those figures. Also at play is our tax assessor collector. I know we have some outstanding questions on this matter, but I'll go ahead and summarize how this process has worked in the past. The Tarrant Appraisal District will provide the sworn appraisal roll to our assessor collector, who in turn works with my office to calculate the no new revenue and voter approval tax rates for us. Once we both agree on the numbers, Colleyville will place the proper notices online and in our newspaper to show the public the calculations. And after we formally adopt a tax rate, the assessor collector manages collection of the taxes, which is really the bulk of their work that we're contracting with them for, is that collection is a massive operation. Now, there are cities out there who approach this process a little differently than we do, but every year our top question when setting a rate is, how much do we need in order to continue operations? And we will not levy a penny over that. There we go. Our rate has two components. The first is operations and maintenance rate that funds all general fund activities. The second is our interest and sinking rate that funds our debt service payments. And here you can see kind of our tax rate history, where we've been. We've been steadily decreasing our tax rate overall since about 2016, and we certainly plan to continue to do that. After adopting the no new revenue rate for the past 2 years, Our total rate is currently sitting at 3.068 cents. And our financial plan, again, is to continue with the no new revenue rate for 2 more years. And our models do show that this is an attainable goal.
Great.
So let me define what those terms I've been using are. The no new revenue rate and the voter approval rate. When a city sets its tax rate, there are 2 boundaries, I guess you can call them, at play. The first one being the no new revenue rate. And this is kind of more of a soft boundary, as it doesn't really represent a minimum rate that you have to levy, but rather it is the rate at which you gain the same revenue as you did in the previous year, not counting for any new properties that came on the tax roll. So if your overall property values, excluding the new properties, went up year over year, this rate will be higher than your current rate. If the values went down, this rate would be lower than your current rate. And if the value went down, the reverse would be true. The voter approval rate is certainly more of a hard boundary. This rate will calculate a no new revenue rate only for the maintenance and operation portion. It then adds 3.5% to it, as well as the debt service rate, and that represents the maximum total rate you can levy before having to call for an election on it. Previously, this election would have been an option for the citizens that would have had to petition for it. Now it is mandatory. So for the next few slides, my final few slides here, I'd like to illustrate how our tax rate compares with some other cities. So first, we have a graph that shows all of our bordering cities. You can see that our rate is, for the most part, vastly lower than all of them. The exception, of course, being Grapevine. They are a very sales tax dependent city. As such, I'll be really interested to see what they do going into next year. Wish them well.
I always said we'd never catch them, but, you know, there's your chance.
It very well could be. The next slide, I think, is a little more, a little more telling for us, because this focus is kind of small. It shows us our surrounding entities. What I was able to do, the comptroller, and I'll have to walk us through what the slide sort of means here. It might look a little confusing at first. But the comptroller basically publishes tax rates in the aggregate for every entity that levies a tax rate. Now, they only have up to FY19 tax rates. So I basically compared our tax rate with all cities, with cities in DFW, and then I put a couple of population parameters on that too. So just to show you how to read this, if you start with the bar on the left, we've got the tax rates for all of our cities. What I'm showing there is the percentage of cities that have a higher tax rate and the percentage that have a lower tax rate than Colleyville. So taking every city in Texas that levied a property tax in FY19, we were lower than about 80% of them, and then higher than about 20% of them. If we narrow the focus to Dallas-Fort Worth, the picture gets a little bit better. We're lower than about 83% and higher than 16.5%. What tends to happen is that the larger a city gets, the higher the rate gets. So, you know, filtering out very small towns who tend to have disproportionately lower tax rates can kind of help us narrow that lens a little bit further as well. So looking at all cities that levied a tax rate in FY19 that had 10,000 or more people, we're in the bottom 5% in terms of how high our rate is. We are a lower rate than about 95% of those cities. If we make that focus even a little bit more restrictive, over 20,000 population, we are in the lowest 3% in terms of our nominal tax rate. It's just kind of, it's good to, I think, take a look at everything that's out there so we can really get a sense of what our efforts are doing compared to the rest of the state and our region. So obviously we have a long way to go, but I think those are pretty fantastic numbers. It's certainly been an accomplishment for Colleyville.
Yeah, very respectable. Top 4% over 20,000, basically.
Yes, sir. I did not
Great
have
accomplishment, yeah.
I did not have to scroll down on my Excel sheet to see Colleyville.
Yeah.
We are not the only taxing entity in the area, and this is very important because when someone looks at their tax bill, A lot of times they automatically think city. And we certainly are a part of it. We have several independent school districts in the area that any one of our residents may fall within, as well as some other smaller taxing entities. So for the purposes of this graph, I used Grapevine Colleyville ISD, although there are a few others that could come into play as well. Of your tax bill, any citizen's tax bill, the ISD makes up about 60% of that. Tarrant County College is around 6%. Hospital District is about 10%, as is the county. And Colleyville takes up the remaining 14% of that. And so while we don't take the lion's share, obviously we take our responsibility very seriously, and we'll continue to do our best to lower that rate for all of our residents. And that is all I have today. This is just a basic overview of our process and how we got here, but I'd like to open the floor up for any questions or comments.
So go back to the slide where you talk about the definitions of no new revenue and.
Yes,
that.
sir.
Yeah, that one.
Right there.
So there's been some discussion I've seen in the media and whatnot about the pandemic and the effect of that on that 3.5%. And so
Yes, sir.
some have said, well, because of the disaster, we can go up to 8%.
Mayor, I can't hear.
Okay, can you hear me now, George?
Yes, sir. Yes.
I was commenting on the fact that there's been some discussion in the media about because of the pandemic and the disaster, can cities and taxing authorities go over the 3.5% back up to the 8%? And I was just going to comment, I believe the governor and the position that the state has taken is no, they can't, because there was provision put in that legislation for disaster, but the disaster had to be such that it impacted property value. And since this was a medical disaster, really had no impact on property values, such as a hurricane or tornadoes could destroy property. And so my current understanding is the 3.5% is the limit. There will be elections for those taxing authorities that put tax rate above that, above that 3.5%. Is that your understanding too, Kyle?
The last I had heard was the Attorney General had not weighed in, so that's kind of what I was looking for.
Okay,
But I'll certainly research and see if I'm behind the time.
okay. Hope not. Very
Yeah.
good. Well, I mean, you gave a presentation that basically the key piece of information was kind of really subtle. That your projection is that you believe in the projection, we don't know yet for sure, but you're projecting that we should be able to hit the no new revenue tax rate this year and perhaps again next year.
That's correct.
That's fantastic news.
Huge.
Yeah.
And again, the real, I think, way that we do that is we utilize hotel motel, where we really
Yeah.
haven't done that a lot.
Yeah.
And so knowing how we can use those revenue streams really helps us out.
Yeah, I don't think people can really appreciate how difficult that is, and how difficult it is in that chart. I like that chart where you compared us to all the cities in Texas and whatnot, but anybody in our class range, which 20,000 or above, so we're right at, very, very, very few are better than that. So that's really a testament to staff and all of you guys and your philosophy and policies on things. All the others that are, there's 20% down there, but those are really, really very small cities that
Yes, they do tend to be the small.
operate a little, yeah. So that's great. Good information.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions, comments?
That was great.
Great presentation.
Yes.
Mayor, just a comment on the issue of the 8%.
Yeah.
There is a debate going on right now. Some have argued, TML most notably, that there is a legal basis for the 8%. The governor and the attorney general have weighed in that they don't believe it
Yeah.
disqualifies.
Yep.
So that issue may, like you've mentioned, result in communities enacting a tax rate beyond the 3.5% and then waiting to see if they're forced into a referendum or not. In our particular case, though, that's not.
Yeah, it doesn't apply to us, but my personal opinion, just my opinion, I don't think it applies. I think you are obligated to be at 3.5%, and if somebody goes around, it's trying to use a loophole in legislation to do that. But anyway, we don't worry about stuff like that, so. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move to agenda item 2, which is discussion of the drainage utility system rate study, Ray?
All right, Mayor, council members, good afternoon. Ray Silveris, Director of Public Works. Today, we're going to look at the drainage utility rate structure. To recap, I'd like to go back. We have had so far 3 presentations on the Stormwater Master Plan. The first 2 meetings that we had, it's been over a year now, we kind of met with the residents and showed where we were having some issues with drainage and got with them and got some feedbacks and put some dots together on a map and kind of compile those together and show here's where we need to be focusing. Then we had another one, we brought that results back to the council during a work session and disseminated that information toward you, and we kept working. We had another public meeting with the residents as well, making sure that we were following in line with what they were seeing out there and what we were seeing out there as well. And we also brought those results back to you. And at that second meeting, we started looking, all right, now we need to bring all this together and put up a stormwater master plan. And so during the last work session, we put one together and we were kind of discussing of, it's quite a bit of projects, substantial amount of projects. It was $40 million worth of projects, including the low water crossings. So how do we work to get a plan together to where we can start implementing those projects? So what we're gonna bring here before you today is to look at, just to assess the drainage rate structure and see how that could work and maybe leverage that to help fund the stormwater master plan. So all this stuff that's gonna be brought here before you is still informational. We're still at the infancy stage as to how to get it implemented and how to make it work. But one component that we do have to look at today is the drainage utility rate structure. And so with me today is Saul Stiegel with Westra, and he's gonna be presenting on what he's found in assessing our drainage utility, and he's gonna bring a lot of information towards you. And as the slides start to unravel, you'll see that a lot of the information will be answered, but if it's not, please let us know. But we're gonna try to get most of your answers, most of your questions answered throughout the presentation, but I'm sure there will be some that we missed. It's just, again, it's a lot of information, so if we can hold some of those questions, unless they're one of those that need to be answered right away, we can try to get them during the presentation and hit them during the Q&A part.
Okay, so I just heard you ask, hey, please listen to everything, and we'll talk about it
Yeah, because some of the stuff is
Great,
gonna be
we'll-
coming right
we'll-
behind it and be
We'll try to
answered.
do that. And,
So-
and really, I guess the discussion today is really about strategy of how we would set the rate structure to fund.
Correct.
Funding
Just-
strategies.
And yes, and we're not asking for a decision
Right.
today, we're just laying this information out there just to get you to think about it.
Yeah.
I believe this is gonna be a long process as to, because there's so much involved here, and we want to make sure we're taking the right steps.
Okay.
And so, as I said, Saul will be presenting the drainage rate structure before you, and so Saul?
Thank you.
Good afternoon,
Hi.
Mayor, City Council. Saul Stiegel, Westra Consultants. Ray and I have been working on this for the last couple of months, 2 or 3 months, and we're excited to present this to you today for your consideration. So to give you some background, oh, this looks new. There we go. The drainage utility set by the city of Colleyville was established in 1993 by City Council, about 27 years ago to date. So that's quite a while back, and the structure of that utility system has not changed since 1993, though we have made some updates to the fee. The fee has increased a few times. But the ordinance states that the drainage utility is here to protect the public health and safety from loss of life caused by flooding, stagnant water, water pollution. So this is a utility that is intended for drainage. So much like a water service, I like to describe it as, a water service provides service to residents, they pay based on the amount of water they use. With the stormwater utility, they should pay based on the amount of drainage that they use. So that's a service that we provide them. It also requires, this is Texas Local Government Code, that the system be established and it's non-discriminatory, reasonable, and equitable. And I've underlined equitable there because I want to talk about that a little bit more in detail. So we're going to go through the existing rate structure as well as go through some options for restructuring if we want to do that. So the purpose of the drainage fee is to provide a revenue source for CIP projects, specifically for drainage. It's also to pay for operation and maintenance of our existing system. We have to keep it up. We have to clean our culverts out. We have to clean our storm drain systems out, make sure that we can get around the city. And we also need to pay for Clean Water Act funds, so the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality and the Stormwater Management Program. That's an unfunded mandate that comes out of this fee as well. So the existing rate structure, as I said, started in 1993 at $4.
We do have an unfunded mandate, you know, I'll
It i-
keep looking for those.
That is an unfunded mandate. Yes, it is, yes. So the existing rate structure was implemented in 1993 at a rate of $4. It was last updated in 2005. The current fee is a flat rate paid on their water bill of $7 for residential. So everyone, regardless of the property they have, pays $7. Non-residential pays on a kind of a tiered system. Parkland and open space pays $10.68, churches pay a little more, and then all of our commercial, industrial, schools pay $24.40, and that is the monthly fee per acre. That's how that is charged. And looking back, we went back and looked at the city database, and over the past 4 or 5 years, it's been approaching $1 million in revenue. We just hit over $1 million in revenue in 2019. So the revenue from the current fee structure, $1 million per year. This is a breakdown of those accounts, non-residential and residential. Primarily, we have residential accounts, 78%, and 22% are the non-residential commercial and schools, with a revenue of $220,000 for non-residential and $780,000 for residential. So we have a large number of residential, most cities do. So I want to talk about a definition. We're going to use this term called impervious surfaces or impervious areas to talk about how we might revise our rate structure. An impervious surface is any surface that doesn't allow water to permeate into the ground. So it's rooftops, it's driveways, it's swimming pools, it's parking lots, anything that doesn't allow water to infiltrate. And impervious surfaces are directly related to runoff. So when we calculate drainage systems and we calculate culverts and bridges, we need to figure out how much runoff comes off of properties and land. This is the way we do it, is through impervious surfaces. And this is a common way that cities do implement rate structures for drainage utilities. This particular graphic shows what a 3-inch rainfall would be and how much runoff would come off of woods, which would basically infiltrate completely. And a commercial area would be almost 100% runoff. It's 2.5 inches of that 3 inches runs off into your drainage system. So the 3 options we're going to talk about, first option would be, let's use our existing rate structure. Let's keep what we have, and let's increase our fee to meet the revenue that we need. This is a flat fee structure. It doesn't account for impervious areas at this time. There is a disparity among classes of property that I'm going to talk about further when we get into the presentation further. And the overall residential and non-residential proportion, though, is equitable, and I'll show proof of that. We did a little sample study of the city. The second option is using an ERU, or equivalent residential unit. This is a common way that cities implement drainage utilities, and it is a measure of the impervious surfaces within the city. And then we wanted to look at having tiers for residential, because we have so many residential accounts, 9,400, that we wanted to look at what would a tiered system look like. Option 3 is everyone pays based on the impervious area that they have on their property, residential or non-residential. It does take a little more time to administer the impervious area, option 3, but we'll get into each of those options. So option 1 is maintaining the current structure. As I said, the revenue is about $1 million annually, and each dollar that we increase that rate generates $145,000 annually. This would maintain the status quo. That's a good thing. But the rates would increase proportionally across residential and non-residential. And so the current rate, parks currently pay $10.68. If we were to raise that by $1 for residential, they would then pay $12.21. So it'd be a minor increase. That dollar for residential has a minor increase in non-residential as well. And these are the revenues projected, that if we were to increase and try to increase revenue by $1 million, we would need to increase the rate by $6.90, so almost double. And that makes sense, because the current revenue is $1 million. If we want to double it, we need to double our fee. And all the residential and all the non-residential would double as well. And so this table shows what our current revenues are at, if we don't increase the rate at all. We have an O&M cost of $600,000 annually. That's automatically taken out of this revenue. And so that leaves us with a CIP budget of $400,000 currently. And we have $40 million that we want to try to pay for. So that's not quite getting us there. So we wanted to look at, okay, what does doubling or adding $1 million to that CIP budget, what does that require of the current rate? So currently, we would need to double the rate. An example of what this looks like in impervious areas is shown here. The property 1, 2, and 3 are current City of Colleyville properties. When we did our sample area study, we actually measured impervious areas on about 400 properties. And so each of these properties pays $7. That's the current rate. But you can see that the impervious surfaces vary, quite a bit between property 1 and 2 especially. But we looked at large lot, acreage lots, and we also looked at some of our smaller lots as well. Non-residential, same kind of issues we see with kind of a disparity, equality issue. The property on the left, property number 1, has about 80,000 square feet more impervious area. So they have much more greater impact on our drainage system, but they both pay the same amount. The current residential rate is shown here in comparison with 20 other cities in our metroplex. So is the rate reasonable? Yes. I definitely think the rate is reasonable at $7. These are flat rates. The majority of these cities have flat rate structures just like you have now. Crowley, Northwestern Hills, and Flower Mound do use a tiered residential structure. But I currently pay $7.25 per month. I'm in Arlington. So I think that $7 is right there in line with most cities. This is where we are with non-residential. A little on the lower side, but still very reasonable rate for non-residential. This is based on a 1-acre property with 75% imperviousness. So we looked at each of these other 20 cities and what would their rate be in comparison to Colleyville. So in comparison, we're a little on the low side in the metroplex. These are our immediate neighbors, and the way they charge residential. As you can see, most of them are flat rates, anywhere from $4 to about $8. Southlake is at $8 for residential, but the majority do use an impervious area calculation for non-residential, and that's something that we evaluated a little further as well, and we think that's a good way to go. Nationally, that is the way a lot of cities are going. 92% of cities use some type of impervious area to calculate their non-residential, at least their non-residential fees. So we looked at a sample study area of the city for 2 reasons, really. One, to evaluate, is our current rate structure equitable? How does it compare between residential and non-residential? Are residential accounting for non-residential fees, revenues? We wanted to see if there's equity there. We also needed to project impervious areas for the entire city. It's the only way that we can come up with what would impervious area rate structure do for our current revenues. So we looked at 540 acres, about 6% of the city, and this shows basically the tracing that we did of all of the parking lots, driveways, buildings within this sample area, we looked at about 400 residential lots and 55 non-residential lots. So the median residential lot size, 20,000 square feet. So you can see we've got some 10,000 square foot lots there on the south side. But the median residential impervious area was 7,200 square feet. And we really liked this sample area because it had both acreage lots, 10,000 square foot, all the way up to 4.5 acre lots. So it was a good sample of the city. And also, it contained some of the commercial along State Highway 26. Of the sample area, we came up with 6.2 million square feet of total impervious area, and we lucked out exactly 50% of that was residential, and 50% of that area was non-residential. So that worked out really well. So how does that compare to revenue? Well, 47% of the revenue of that area comes from residential, and 53% comes from non-residential. So it's fairly equitable across residential and non-residential. But within the classes of property, we did see some inequalities there. Okay, so let's go through some of our options for coming up with an impervious area calculation or rate structure. Our option 2 is an ERU with tiers, or equivalent residential unit. We selected 3,500 square feet as our equivalent residential unit. And what that means is, if we're gonna charge $7, how much impervious area is that worth? How much impervious area are we gonna charge $7 for? Well, 3,500 square feet is a pretty common square footage for that. We've seen ERUs as low as 2,000 and as high as 5,000. So the reason we selected 3,500 square feet was because we wanted to generate a revenue of about $2 million. So, there's two levers here. You've got your equivalent residential unit, and you've got your $7 charge. And you can play with either one of those to kind of adjust that rate. Mm-hmm. This is a measure of the drainage system use. And it is impervious area basis. And we set up 4 tiers for residential. We wanted to keep the $7 rate as a kind of our standard, but we needed to set that at 3,500 square feet so we could generate a revenue of about $2 million. Here are the tiers that we established. And these tiers, they're basically just ranges of impervious area based on the 400 lots that we looked at. So we looked at 25%. What's that first 25% average area? That average impervious area was actually 4,225 square feet. And so that charge was $8.45 for that particular area. So that's how we came up with that range. From 0 to 5,350 would be a charge of $8.45 for residential, and then the other tiers continue to go up. So it's equivalent. It's equivalent based on impervious area. With this tiered system, I will say people may pay a little more or a little less than what they would actually pay if we measured their impervious area. So that tiered rate gives you a range. It allows also to administer this a little easier. If someone comes in and builds a deck, builds a pool, their rate may not change. If we used a completely impervious area calculation, their rate could vary every time they do some sort of addition to their home. The projection, we used that sample area to come up with this projection. Residential had a percent impervious on average of 26.8%. So we took the total land area that the city had that was residential. We have GIS methods that we can use now to determine those. And we calculated an estimated impervious area for residential and an estimated impervious area for non-residential. Add those up. You divide those by the ERU equivalent, and you get 24,000 equivalent residential units for the city, and then the projected annual revenue of $2 million. So residential is 71% of the runoff, and so residential pays 71% of that fee, of that revenue, comes from residential. Non-residential is 29% of the runoff, so they pay their 29%, the total revenue. It's a very equitable way to do it, much more equitable than the current rate structure. But it's not perfect. The example of residential, comparison of the way that current fee would look versus the revised fee. Currently, that 1.3 acre property with 5,700 square feet would pay $7, where their fee would increase, because they're in that second tier, they would increase to $12.62. That second property, they would be within that third tier, so they would have a monthly fee of $25, and the third one would be in the they're in the third tier. I'm sorry, the second property's in the fourth tier, and the third property's in the third tier.
Can I ask one question? Sorry.
Sure.
Trying to hold them in.
Absolutely.
These calculations are only based on the square foot of impervious property. It doesn't matter how large the overall property is. It's not a ratio.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct, yeah.
That's fine. I just want to make sure I'm really clear. That's
Sure, and, yeah, okay. So for commercial, again, a comparison of what they pay right now and what they would pay. The current fee of $122, well, now it would be revised. The property with 80,000 more square feet of impervious area would pay based on their amount of area, which would change their fee to $364 a month. And the other property two would change from $122 to $203 a month. So here's another great example of some of the disparity we see with the current rate. This is Bransford Elementary and Market Street. Market Street is almost completely impervious. It was hard to find an open space area within Market Street. Bransford Elementary, on the other hand, has quite a bit of impervious area, or open space area. But because they pay based on parcel area and land use, Bransford Elementary actually pays more than Market Street. And Bransford Elementary has about 110,000 less square feet of impervious area. So using an impervious area rate it's really kind of the trend where where we're moving to. Okay, option 3. This option, it's very straightforward. Everyone pays based on the square footage of impervious area of their property, regardless if it's residential or non-residential. So there's no tiers for residential with this option. It is also a measure of the drainage system use, and it is most equitable. The charge there, we use the same basis of the previous option 2, which was 3,500 square feet pays $7. That's the same as 1,000 square feet pays $2. So everyone pays based on the square footage of impervious areas, $2 per 1,000 square feet. Same revenue of just about over $2 million.
This is a question here relative to how accurate do we think the measures are that on the table that you showed, the overall 2 million
So George, let me
total revenue.
break in here a second.
You're gonna wait till the end?
Yeah, they've asked us to wait, and there's gonna be a jillion questions like that one. That one's not an easy answer, that's why.
That's a good,
I'd rather
very
wait.
good question.
I know,
It's a good question.
Go ahead.
I'm dying to answer it, but I'm going to wait.
that's fine.
Okay, option 3, we're nearing the end. Option 3, everyone pays based on impervious area. The charge would be $2 per 1,000 square feet. Same revenue as option 2. So we're not talking about difference in revenues. We're just talking about difference in how it's administered. With the cities that pay based on impervious area, this is where that $2 kind of fits in. It's a reasonable rate. Richland Hills pays $5. I believe that's Richland Hills, yes. $5 per 1,000 square feet. And so we're looking at $2, which isn't an unreasonable fee for impervious area calculations. And this is where option 3 looks. As far as residential goes, option 3 is, there's a little difference in the fee. So with property number 1, With option two, you know, they're within the tier, so they're actually paying a little more than they should. Their actual impervious area makes that calculation $11.40 per month. That's what they should pay. The second property, there's quite a bit of difference there. They're actually not having to pay as much as they should. So based on impervious area, their charge would be $40 per month. And then property three, they would pay a little bit more at $17.80. So it is the most equitable way of charging. For commercial, there's just a minor difference between option two and option three, and that's because of rounding, because you would want to charge commercials based on a set ERU number, not a decimal of ERU. So it'd be either, you know, 4. If it's 4.5 ERUs, you'd charge them 5. So that's the difference between commercial. So they're very similar. Is that me?
I think it's the mic.
Okay. So in summary, this is really a summary for both option one and option two. The revenue is the same, just over $2 million. We were looking at generating $2 million because we were wanting to get a certain number of projects done per year with our stormwater CIP. If you recall, with option one, each $1 generates $145,000 in revenue annually. With this impervious area option, each dollar yields $288,000. So it generates more. And so therefore, if you wanted to enact an impervious area rate structure and keep the revenue as it is, so be revenue neutral, you would actually charge a lower rate. You would charge about $3.50. So to generate the $2 million that we were wanting to generate, we looked at keeping the rate at $7, and then less operation and maintenance. That leaves $1.4 million in our account to be used for stormwater CIP projects.
Per year.
Okay, I know that was a lot to take in, and I apologize for all that I
That's
just
okay.
spit at you.
It was done very well, though.
But the rate structure was developed 27 years ago. That was a long time ago, 1993.
Yeah.
The current methodology does not account for impervious area. It doesn't, we aren't assessing fees for drainage based on the use of your drainage system. Adopting a fee structure based on impervious areas is more equitable, but it will impact virtually all classes of property.
Yeah.
And what we can do is we can revise these drainage fees. We can adjust the rate and, I don't know.
I don't know where that's coming from.
I think it's the mic itself.
Could be my static.
George, you're not moving around, are you?
He's on mute.
Blame it on George.
Or can you hear the static?
Yes, I can hear
Okay.
the static,
Yeah.
and I'm muted.
Okay,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, I'm almost done. I'm
Okay.
going to get 6 feet away from this mic. I think that's what's the problem. The drainage utility fee can be revised to generate the revenue that we decide we want to generate for our CIP.
Right.
So that, this is just an example. The $2 million was an example revenue. And in summary, what we'd like for you to do is consider these things. Do we want to change the methodology? Do we want to keep the rate structure the way it is now? If so, what revenue do we want? What revenue goal do we want? What do we want to generate? What projects do we want to get done? And then we will back into what rate we need. And if we decide to change the methodology, that's a whole nother process that we could talk
Yeah.
about. So first of all, I think it's just, do we want to do it? And with that, I'm happy to answer any.
Okay, so I'll start.
Sure.
So I think the major question on the table tonight is, what is our strategy for how we charge? And you raised a very good point early on, and that was the question of equity. Do we want to move to a methodology that is more equitable than we are today? My personal answer is yes. I think we've used that philosophy on our utility rate structures that we changed to. We want to be equitable for our citizens. And so I'm in the boat on there. So you presented a couple ways to do that. And so I've got some questions about the details of that. Option 2, you had a tiered system, and option 3, you didn't have a tiered system. It's purely impervious area. Either way, you talked about ERUs. Either one of those, you talked about ERUs. So I think what's important from a citizen standpoint, me being a citizen, thinking like a citizen, not as an elected official right now, you know, I pay $7 now. And so to me, that's the base. Right now, I pay $7, and any way I think about when you change the structure, my reference point is at $7. And so I think to get to something we can claim to be equitable, we have to establish what is the proper reference point today. And so we have to create that, because right now we do not have a reference point around impervious area. It's just flat $7. You live here at $7. Right. And so to be equitable, I think we need to, my opinion is, we should move to some kind of impervious area computation. But the only way I've thought about this, the only way I know how to get to that reference point is, okay, what happens today? Today you pay $7. Everybody has different impervious areas, so my first question is, what is the average residential impervious area in Colleyville today? We may not know that yet, but to me, that average impervious area would equate to the $7. And so maybe that's an approach to coming up with what an ERU is and an ERU value. I'm not saying that, or you could adjust it down, you could adjust the ERU down, but that reference point, I think it's important. I would have to, or I would argue that whatever the average impervious area is today, that's equivalent to $7. So use that, and I think that gives us that reference point back that we, as we're trying to explain this to citizens, can use as a rational basis for what we're doing. I mean, 3,500, I was going to ask, where did that come from? Well, it's just a number you pull out of the air. 1,000 just a number you pull out of the air, but we need a point of reference to our citizens and what they pay today. So that was my first comment. And so we can figure that out. I mean, we can compute what that number is. And then however we adjust rates, I think as long as we can tag it back and we can explain, hey, you pay $7 today, this is the basis for that, and this is how we're doing it in the future, and here's how it moves from there to here. And I think, either one of those approaches would get you there. You said the tiered system is a little easier to administrate, and so that's a rational thought. How do you do this in a way that's as easy as possible to do, but fair, but fair. The other questions have to do with the commercial and residential. You made a statement toward, when you were doing the example, you said, hey, we lucked out, we picked an area 50-50 residential, 50-50 commercial. I wasn't sure what that meant. That meant 50% of the area was commercial and 50% of the area was residential? So it was a geographical.
Yes, it was
Okay,
geographically lucky.
And then you came back and you said, you talked about the Market Street and School example, and the inequity of that, and I didn't track those numbers, I think, because today for Market Street, because you said, well, Market Street pays a lot less than school. Market Street has a lot more impervious area today, and you said that's because it's based on land use and size. Why just today, it's a curious question, why did Market Street pay less than, based on our current system? Why is that?
It's because the charge is based on parcel area, and so Market Street has 7 acres, Bransford has 8.8 acres.
Yeah.
Because Bransford has a larger parcel area, they are charged more.
I got you. It's a percentage computation. Okay, that didn't work. I got you. Okay,
Mayor,
we're going to change, yeah.
It's acre-based.
Yeah, acre-based, yes, right, right, okay. Okay, I understand that now, great. Well, those are my, I know there's going to be other questions, but those are my primary comments, I think, and we need to settle in on that strategy first. And it may, your other questions, I don't think we'll necessarily get to tonight, because the next question have to do with, okay, how fast do we want to fund this? How much we want, what's the priority areas, how fast we're going to fund it? That's another type of question. I think this is the most important question. What's the strategy of how we charge? And it's got to be very explainable to citizens. It's got to be rational and logical. so that they understand it, and, because we don't want anyone, because we're going to claim, if we do change, we're going to claim this is a more equitable way, so we have to make that argument so they understand it and agree with it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So those are my comments.
Just a minor, well, my comment is, we need some time to communicate this. It's not straightforward and not obvious, in my opinion, that, you know, if we're going to tell someone, okay, now you're going to pay $15 and you've been paying $7, we're going to need some meetings and some opportunities to talk to people, similar to what we did, I think, when we did the early meetings for the drainage.
Yeah, I agree, George. In fact, it's going to take a number of things that we have to do. So you're now talking about, well, okay, once we figure it out, how do we communicate it? That's a whole activity set. Agree with you 100%.
It is.
It's got to be a
And-
straightforward story that's understandable. And
Yes.
there's going to be we're going to ask for a lot of data. You know, we're going to want to see all the numbers first. We have to understand it first. Once we understand it, we can explain it.
I got a couple things also. Back in 2015, when we ran a campaign against tiered water rates. And I really have a sore spot for something that says tiered on it, number one. I think that if we're going to do anything, kind of like what we did with the water, we charge across the board. Now, if we want to computate something like large, we're talking about larger houses, they sit on larger lots. So we need to know what the computation is. So if a guy's living in an 8,000 square foot house, but he's living on 13 acres, he's actually got smaller hydraulics than a house that's 20,000 square feet sitting on a 25,000 square foot lot. So I don't want to penalize that guy, because, you know, with the tiered water rates that we ran against, we were trying to keep our larger lots. And I want those larger lots to stay. It
Right.
keeps
So-
density down, and so,
Yeah.
but I also know that we are way behind on our commercial. In Irving, I pay $90 per water meter, and here we're paying 20-something
Per month?
per month extra. And I hate to use the COVID thing, but if COVID's hurting some small businesses or this or that, we need to think about a stair-step system on how we can start it this year, do a little more than the following year, and catch ourselves up, not to the highest, but maybe 3/4 of the way up. Colleyville has been very gracious, I think. And it's time that we take care of things. And a lot of these businesses, like you say, has a lot of high concrete, a lot of hydraulics that are flowing, and that's actually doing the damages to our residential areas.
Right.
And so, unfortunately, they need to buck up and pay the bill. Now,
Yeah.
am I saying that we as citizens shouldn't help too? No, I'm saying that we need to be very sensitive to that and to what we're doing.
Yeah, so I'm going to make a statement, and you correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm listening to you, and I'm going to try to answer some of that in my words, so that I can understand it as I think about it. So you talked first about the tiered water rates in this. What's the difference? If we do go to tiered, what's the difference? Water rates, what we're doing, we're paying for how much water you use.
Right.
So even though, if we do end up with some kind of tiered structure, the point is, you're going to pay for your impervious area. In other words, you're going to pay for how much drainage you generate.
Right, so that's a
Same concept,
that's a
right?
computation, unless you're just trying to tier it like you're taking.
Yeah,
I want to make sure that we're really looking at how much area.
okay, well, let me back off. Let's
Okay.
go to option 3 first. Option 3 is no tier. Option 3 is exactly what I said. You pay for how much drainage you create, and that drainage is based on impervious area.
But you got to computate it to how much is not impervious.
N-
So
not-
if it, like, again,
Yeah,
my example is
yeah,
a larger house that sits,
Yeah.
you know, if you're living in a 10,000 square foot house, but you're also living on
yeah,
10 acres, that doesn't make the same as a 10,000 square foot house that's living on 2 acres. And so,
well, let me try this, so you guys tell me if I'm wrong. So, I don't care how many acres you're on. If you got 10,000 feet of impervious area, you're generating the same amount of runoff, same amount of drainage.
okay, so I disagree.
Okay.
And here's why. Because if your lot is draining towards your grassy area and you're
Yeah.
running that water through 10 acres,
Yeah.
a grassy area, the hydraulics are going to be a lot less. And it comes down to 0% is what his graph even shows, that 0% on the larger lots, then the smaller lots, which is 20,000 square feet, at 38%. That actually brings more drainage to our creeks.
Well, I'm not ready to agree with you on the
That's
flood drain.
okay.
I think impervious area is the best measure, because what you're talking about is percentage of impervious area to your whole property. That's what you're talking about.
That's correct. That's what I want
And-
to make sure that we're careful of.
Yeah, so that doesn't work on commercial.
And I said commercial's different. I specifically said commercial's different.
Yeah.
Commercial needs to pay their portion. They need,
Yeah.
they've been getting a really good break
Yeah.
lately.
So I could argue, so I'm gonna take a counter argument.
Okay.
And I'm doing this on
Sure,
purpose, so you
sure,
can
absolutely.
challenge right back at me. So we got the smaller lots in town.
Uh-huh.
Percentage, pervious area is gonna be a lot higher than on my 2.5 acres or somebody's 10 acres,
Right.
right? And so would you propose that I pay an inordinate amount more, even though I have the same impervious area, than just because somebody has a bigger lot?
Absolutely not. And so
Okay.
here's what I think is fair across the board. So we either are gonna have to compare your impervious to the other, to what your drainage is,
Okay.
how much area you have,
Yeah.
or we're gonna have to go across the board and say, look, everybody's gonna pay $10.
Okay.
That's my philosophy of it.
All right, so you're banking it. See, I'm still, your key is that total area, percentage of total area being impervious. And your argument is, well, it drains through that 10 acres of pasture.
Right.
Not necessarily. I may have conduits going out the street. In fact, most of the drainage on the house is gonna go out the street.
You may.
I mean, but let me back all the way up. My deal is equity. Do you
Okay.
agree with that or not agree? Let's go after equity.
Absolutely, I
Okay.
agree with that.
So now we're arguing about how to get there. Okay.
Right, and that's just a discussion, that's why I want to get my part out there to where people
Yeah.
can see where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
And give the ideas, I mean, really and truly,
So
because these
he's-
are all just calculations.
Yeah, so he's just asked a harder question that you guys are gonna get to answer. And he's posed that I don't personally agree with, that's
That's
okay,
okay.
doesn't matter. He's posed that, hey, his example, I got somebody with 10 acres and a 10,000 impervious area, and somebody with 1 acre or a half acre and 10,000 impervious area. His claim is, they're the same impervious, but the guy on the bigger acres puts less runoff. I personally don't think that's right, but that's an engineering question somebody's gonna have to get the answer, because that's very important to where we go.
Absolutely, like I say, and you're right, some people could drain straight towards the road, but some
Yeah.
people could actually be scattering their water across the 10 acres, and
Yeah.
now we're gonna penalize them whenever they're actually helping the city by breaking it down, and
Yeah.
hydraulics are down to 0.
So, is there?
Well, I'm gonna throw a-
and
I'm gonna throw a
I'm
couple
not claiming
wrenches.
you need to answer that tonight, I'm just
No,
saying,
right
I
now,
recognize
right
as a tougher, I don't know how you're gonna answer
30 seconds.
that.
I don't even-
With supporting facts.
That's good discussion.
Okay,
I will say this about undeveloped property.
yeah,
Before a house is put on the property,
yeah,
the city still has to take that drainage, right? So there's no
Yeah.
improvement that's been done.
right.
But your own graph says
You- when-
0%.
If it's, if they have
Well,
a detention pond.
go back to that slide, now, I
Sure.
know what he's talking about.
Which,
It's-
which
it's
slide
not-
was it?
Go back to the slide that shows the different types of ground
Drainage.
cover and runoff coefficients.
Right
There
there.
you go.
Oh,
So you said he saw that impervious 0, they all say 0. But now, ask your question again,
So
Bobby.
let's just say we're in, we're in Meadow, all right, and I've decided to stick a 10,000 square foot house right in the middle of 10 acres right there. How much of that water is actually gonna drain out to the road in 10 acres? What's your hydraulic flows? What's your ground saturation? Where is it gonna go?
it really depends on where the.
That's what I'm
Where
saying.
it's at, yeah, there could be some things called credits, this is one of the wrenches I'm gonna throw at you.
Okay.
If someone has a pond on their property, if someone has a way to detain, if someone has
like
a
that.
moat around their house, and all the water from their property
And an
goes into
alligator.
that moat, there's no drainage coming to the city. So there are definitely options for people who have larger lots and can do different things to maybe get some credits on that.
Yeah, but some people, even though they have a pond, some still go out of the pond. onto the street or
Yeah.
onto somewhere else, yeah.
They would have to provide, I would think, some sort of engineering calculation to show
Right,
that
to
there's
show
a
that-
detention effect happening with that. But BMP credits, that is an option. Some cities do that.
And again, what I'm trying to say also is that, like, if we have a 25,000 square foot lot, and I take 50% of that lot, you're gonna get a lot more drainage off that lot than you will a bigger one. Unless the water runs straight off the gutters into the road off of a 10,000 square foot house in the
Okay.
middle of a 10-acre lot. So I'm giving
Okay, no, I
calculations.
get you. So let's talk about how you engineers do this, right? Take one of these examples, whatever, 10 acres and 10,000. You compute overall runoff coefficient for the area, right?
Yes.
That overall runoff coefficient takes account of the impervious area and then the non-impervious area. So you might go, so your runoff coefficient on this woods, I don't know, is what is it? 0.6 over 3 inch, 0.6 over 3, right?
Yeah, 2.4.
Right.
0.3 is
Right.
what we typically see
Yeah,
for that.
and so if you stick 10,000 square foot pervious on top of that, you can compute the new one. So really, I think Bobby's arguing for not impervious, but runoff coefficient. I mean, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
But then, so I can't argue with that. However, now that gets complicated because you have to
I
compute that
know.
for every single lot in
I-
town.
I know. And that's why I started off with the tier water rates in 2015. Everybody was, and it is different, it really is
Yeah.
different,
Yeah.
but this is what the public's gonna see. This is what the questions they're gonna ask, they're gonna say, why are they, whenever you're happy to have my bigger lot here.
Yeah,
And so,
Okay.
I just wanna be ready to tell them, hey, look,
okay, so
Mayor-
well, it's legitimate. So here's what he's introduced, and we want to take into account, or he wants to take into account, he maybe can convince me to.
that's gonna be a hard
That
one.
we don't want to create disincentives for larger lots, okay?
Mayor Pro Tem,
Agreed.
wanted to comment on the tiered rate concern, because that was certainly something that we discussed when preparing this
Yeah.
presentation. Ray and I were
Right.
certainly aware there might be some sensitivities certainly coming out of our redesign of our
Yeah.
water rate structure. I think one point that might be helpful to point out to folks with questions about that is, in the water situation, the tiered rate ultimately got to a point where for a single gallon of water, you were paying a different amount for
Oh,
that
yeah.
single gallon, depending on your total usage.
Right.
In this scenario with the tiers, you're still paying the same amount for that one unit. It's just a multiplication factor.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
and
true.
I completely agree with that. I know I was one of the high tiers. I remember getting those $500, $600, $700 water bills a month.
Yeah,
And that's why I'm here now.
yeah,
But that's why I want to be sensitive. You're right, Mayor. If there's a 10,000 square foot house and he's sitting on 1 acre, and I'm just using numbers,
yeah,
and he's draining out the road, yeah, he probably should pay a little more.
yeah.
But if it's somebody, Bert Collins, out in the middle of 30 acres, just
He's
because.
gonna be sitting on 3 acres real soon.
Right. But I'm just saying, using him as an example. I just want to be, I want to be sensitive to that, really and truly.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
no problems.
yeah, but
We're
so,
all going to work through it.
well, this is what they want to hear, what are our thought process around this? But unless anybody disagrees, a key philosophy is equity. Another philosophy is, hey, we want to incentivize large lots, not disincentivize them. So and we'll have to talk about it. Are we doing that or not, and how? But-
Right, and we'll look at that. That was one of
Yeah.
the discussions we looked at as we were
Yeah.
preparing this presentation as well, is how do we look at those 20,000 square foot lots as
Right.
opposed to the 10 acres? So
Yeah.
that is actually a good process to look at the coefficient there and to try to see how we can add some
Yeah.
credits back there to not disincentivize those
Yeah.
large property owners.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's difficult. Did you have a question, Chair Kelly?
No,
Somebody
I
was-
think we probably covered it. I will say that I'm at the opposite end of this
Oh, yeah.
discussion in that I have a 1,700 square foot
Yeah,
house, so it's
yeah.
half the size of what you're using
Yeah.
as an equity unit.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at it from not penalizing the small
Yeah.
house footprints at the same time.
Yeah, well, you're at the point, see, I think, I was thinking about that kind of example when what's our reference point? People pay 7, so you pay 7 for whatever you have, and so you're used to that.
Right.
And so that, we need a reference point, we can go back to 7, and I don't know how to do that,
Yeah.
other than, what's the average? So you may be on the lower end, but, on the average, what's the average ERU?
Exactly.
You know.
So that's,
So-
I think we need to really if we're going to do something like this,
Yeah.
we're gonna have to drill down. The problem that I also see is, unlike the water flow into the house, which is metered,
Yeah.
we don't meter the water flow out of the house, so,
course.
we're gonna have to do something different because we don't have that measurement.
Yeah, and we estimate that,
Just don't
How
use your
much?
water in January, February, and it was March. Is that when we got December, January, February? Yeah. Go rent an outhouse, and then you'll have your sewage.
And so we realize these obstacles, so that's why we're
Yeah.
bringing it here, and it's a lot of information, there's a lot of stuff
Yeah.
that we've never thought about before, but like you said, back in 1993, when this started, things have changed, and so we need to
Absolutely.
look at how we achieve to get to the Stormwater Master Plan CIP, and how we do it in an equitable way, so that's what we wanted
Yeah.
to present here today,
Yeah,
and we'll continue the dialogue and the narrative moving forward.
yeah, and so, and Tammy and Kathy, I don't want to take up the whole time.
No, I mean, this is exactly the conversation that I had. I had concerns too about
Okay.
the ratio of water that's being, hitting impervious surface versus absorbed. The other thing that I think might be helpful, I loved the examples that you gave, but I think it also might be helpful to just show those charts with those different option 2 and option 3, based on what we currently bring in, so that I can see how like one property plays out in the current rate structure. Does that make sense? So we're bringing in $1 million right now. Instead of showing me what it would look like if we bring in 2 million, what does it look like today? So if we are gonna do a phased approach, what's it gonna mean for my property today in one of these different scenarios? Does that make sense? That way I can evaluate the impact of,
I think he had one thing that showed like
I
if
miss
we raised it up another
But-
$3.45, it'd give 900,000.
But I think
No,
the
no, no.
point is that if you left everything the way it is today and you applied equity, there'd be a fair number of properties that would go below $7.
yeah, I
And
just
so
wanna see what it.
How would that
today.
distribution be
Right,
split?
without changing
Yeah.
the income.
I got
Yes.
Right, without changing what we're trying to bring in, what would it look like, these different scenarios?
Yeah.
That-
What each option would
Yeah.
do to.
I
Exactly.
think,
Yeah,
yeah,
I think it'd be very easy to do with,
yeah, I think we're gonna have to zoom into
agreed.
an option, like we did with the utility rates. Once we come up, okay, we think this is our strategy. Now, if you apply that to everybody out there today, what's
Right.
who the winners and losers, who goes up, who goes down?
I totally
Right.
agree.
Yeah.
I just think, for me, it was a little confusing to say, hey, today it's currently $7.
Yeah.
But now we're gonna try and bring in more money, and option 2 is gonna
Yeah.
be
$12.
$12.62. It just was, those weren't apples to apples to me. Does that
Right,
make
yeah,
sense? Yeah,
yeah.
but I agree, there's way more digging we have to do.
Yeah. So to me, does anybody, I mean, I'm not for leaving it like it is. Is anybody?
No.
Okay, so we are talking option 2 or 3, or some variation of option 2 or 3. And
Mayor?
so we're just now getting in, you need to get into clearer proposal that tends to meet the philosophies that you heard. And once we zoom into that, then you're gonna hear these questions about, okay, now if we start applying that, how does it look to everybody in town? And we did that when we did the utility rates. We had a chart of, when we made the rate changes, who's gonna pay a little more and who's gonna pay a little less, and what's the distribution across the city?
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
And in fact, if you remember, we actually ended up with a large number of people who were actually getting free water.
Yes,
back-
right,
Now, that's not the case here,
right.
but if we're going to try to generate more revenue, if we start, if we take half of the people and charge them less, we're going to be in terrible problem issue then.
Right.
Well, I
Well,
think-
yeah, and that's why I
So
wanna.
I think
zoom-
7 has to be a base
Yeah,
in a minor, and maybe it has to be 8 or something,
yeah,
you know?
yeah, but
Gotta
that's
generate
why.
more revenue.
Yeah, I think we have to establish the methodology, then
Yep.
we decide how much money we need to raise. And based on that, how that we set the rates using that new philosophy.
Mr. Mayor?
Sure.
And Mayor, and by having the conversation you just had,
Yeah,
that the general direction is, we're gonna change, and we're gonna change to an equity-based,
right,
answers an important question about assessing the coverage throughout the community.
Yeah.
Because regardless then of how you proceed, you need to know those values.
Yeah.
And so go ahead and study those values, and then you can apply all the different aspects. You can then simply say, if you kept the revenue neutral, what would the impact be? Some percentage would go down, some percentage would go up, and how would that distribute?
Right.
And then if you wanted to take that base level and apply a percentage increase in options over time or in fixed increments, you could do that. But that model all needs that base level data. And so this is an important conversation to tell us we need to obtain that information.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you have enough to go work some more? Okay.
It's 30 years, it's been almost 30 years. It's time that we take care of business,
Yeah.
right?
Somebody was brilliant, and put that in place, so weren't they?
Who was that smart guy?
I don't know.
Whoever did it was very brilliant, that's for sure.
We're having fun now.
Questions?
No,
Very good presentation.
no, thank you, yeah,
We'll take those input and we'll come back with another one and kind of try to
yeah.
hit more direct to what we were talking about today, and we'll go from there.
Okay, great.
Great
Thank you
start.
very much, appreciate it.
Mayor,
I had a fun conversation. Yeah.
another fun conversation. I just got a text from Ronnie. It says, "Can you please keep the mayor talking for the next 15 minutes? This is my first time and I'm super nervous. Give me 2 minutes to talk." I love, she is so awesome. I'm just harassed that she did not say that. She's so good. I knew this was her first time.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Ronnie Orr. I am with the City of Colleyville. I'm the Community Relations and Event Specialist. So thank you for having me here, Mayor and Council. I'm here to provide an update for Stars and Guitars. All right. So currently, neither the city nor Joe Nichols have signed a contract.
Should have walked up there with a sparkler lit.
The glow-in-the-dark
got
necklace.
it.
Yes, I should have. Next time, next time. Ooh, is that me?
No, that's.
No.
So there's
Just ignore him, Ronnie.
There is a low probability of Joe Nichols actually performing if the contract was executed, because his last performance was early March, and his last publicized performance was canceled in April. So with the COVID-19 and physical distancing guidelines right now, large crowd gatherings are a little bit difficult to manage. And currently, the city is easing back into holding special events. I don't know if anyone was able to come in this past Saturday, but we had our second annual car show, and that was actually very well attended, so that was great to see. I see Chuck sporting a hat over here. So that being said, after several discussions with the city management team, we've decided there are two options. The first option is to cancel the event, and that is a non-starter for us.
Right.
So, as you all are aware, per the city manager's email communication, we have decided to reformat the event and hold it anyways. The way it's going to look is it will be relocated to City Park right behind us. There are 40 acres of parkland that can be used to accommodate a multitude of people and provide room to spread out if they so choose so. There are over 400, close to 500 parking spots. Rather than having a musical act, we will have a DJ, and that music will be played on site as well as fed into the car's sound system via an FM transmitter. And there will still be fireworks. It will actually be enhanced from last year, so that's actually exciting. The way we are reformatting this event is to make it family-friendly and kind of have a blast from the past feel to it. So it's going to be tailgate style. That parking lot really will have a lot of space for families to bring in their cars, bring in their picnic tables, their chairs. BYOB, bring your own blanket. There's plenty of space on the grounds to, have a little picnic with your family, play some ball. There
Know
will
what's
be.
gonna happen, right?
Why did everybody look at me?
I didn't look at you. There will be hand wash and hand sanitizer stations, just as there were at the car show this past weekend, for people to use as they wish. Games, food trucks, entertainers, Colleyville branded merchandise like glow necklaces, footballs, hula hoops, hacky sacks, just kind of, really family-focused event where everyone can come together and be separate if they so choose. There will be fireworks. We're using the same vendor as last year, but putting a little bit more money into it, so bigger bang for the buck. So it will be awesome, bigger and better. This event is going to bring that hometown feel that Colleyville is known for, And I know it is a little bit different than years past, but I am looking forward to it personally, and I'm excited to see how the citizens will react to this new version. Since we have been forced to seek other opportunities, we are thinking about next year how our vision will look for 2021. We're exploring the idea of maybe moving it permanently to City Park, depending on how this year unfolds, to accommodate larger crowds. I've spoken with Lisa, the Parks Director, and talked about temporarily removing the baseball fencing to accommodate large people for a large, big-name band, a large stage, basically large, bigger, better. So there's nothing wrong with that. And this is just in a discussion, early phases, so more to come on that after this first event goes through. At this point, though, that's all the updates that I currently have. So if you have any questions or concerns, now is the time to address, and hopefully I can answer them.
Well, I know one thing I loved last year. I liked it where it was last year, but I'm going to keep an open mind till after we have this one to see. I just don't want to make any, of course, decisions on next year until after we have this one.
I agree.
But I know whatever you do, it'll be nice. So we'll have two. We can compare it after it's over.
I agree. Any other questions?
No, I think you
Yeah,
definitely.
so are we saying that people can basically spread out wherever they want?
Yes, exactly.
And they can park, I'm assuming they can also park if they want to, south of the city hall, right?
Yes, where the car show was held, they can park in that south lot and tune into that FM station to hear the music and watch the fireworks from there.
And Ronnie, one of the points with the firework provider was that they're going to place their display so that the view from the south lawn of City Hall and that south lot where the car show was is actually a perfect angle, as is the parking lot on the other side and the other ball fields. So families can go sit in the ball fields. They can actually go with the kids, hang out in the park area. They could sit on the tennis courts. They could sit on any of these parcels and have a great view of the fireworks because of the way they're placed. So it gives people a lot of options and
Yeah.
freedom to choose.
One thing I just wanted to say is that we probably might want to get prepared for an overflow of people, because as we saw the car show, we didn't realize how big a deal that was going to be. I mean, you were actually on WBAP radio this morning with Brian Estridge. They bragged on you and about how much you brought, how many cars we had there. Now people are ready to get out, and so just wanted to make you aware that we may have more than what we can handle in that little area. So,
Yes.
you know, I know we're trying to wing it, and that's what we need to do, and try to do what's best for the city and our citizens, but just be prepared.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I also think any guidance we can give people, because, for instance, hearing about sitting on the ball fields, I thought we were just going to be in our cars. So I think we just need to have a lot of explanation about where people can go, where they can sit, what they should bring, I think that would be, the more information we can provide, the better for
Yes,
everybody.
and tonight was really about kind of introducing the concept to the public, but certainly that's in play, and also remote parking will be identified as well. We do think we'll have a good turnout, especially if the weather's nice. And so some of the consideration we've talked with the police department about is whether or not we would close Bransford or have limited access there at the event time. Obviously have additional lighting. One thing that benefits us is the ball fields having lighting. You can turn all that on and then turn it off when the fireworks are going to start, and then afterwards kind of kick it back on. But there's a lot of discussion of overflow and the ability to accommodate large crowds, and we hope that the good news is we've got plenty of room for everyone to sit on a blanket if they wish, or to tailgate, or to stay in their car and be remotely located even behind City Hall and all these little nooks and spaces. And so I think it's going to work really well for anyone who wants to come, who's uncomfortable or who wants to stay out of the public fray.
I
So-
agree, though, an over-communication of options for citizens is definitely,
We may even
A
look
must.
at other parking lots like Market Street. Even though it's a distance from it, you could still probably park there and see the fireworks. Walmart,
Absolutely.
and Bransford, like
Yeah,
you're saying.
First Colleyville would probably be another place.
Yes.
They,
Yeah, First-
they have a very large lot that I'm sure
yeah.
they'd be able to see very
They
well
got
from
them
there.
Soccer fields and stuff, if people wanted to sit, if they would
Yeah.
let them sit out
Absolutely.
there.
Are we going to do tables again, or is everyone going to?
there will not be
No.
tables this year, no.
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 So it's like a picnic.
Yes.
Yeah, but, and what's happening, a lot of cities have canceled all fireworks, so we're gonna be one of the few fireworks show in the area. So there'll
like
be
doing
a lot of people coming,
And that rings similar to the car show.
Yes,
Several cities
right.
have canceled theirs, so
yeah,
hence the large turnout.
yeah.
One thing I can say, last year that was a downside of the event is we did not have enough food trucks. It took a long time to
Yeah,
get
it
food.
did.
I waited an hour and a half. So, we want to see how many we can gather there and.
I will
make
max
sure
that
we
out
have it.
for you.
And have them on separate sides. I know
Yes.
Yes.
last year you were about to announce us and I had to run over and I thought, oh my gosh.
Yeah,
'cause it
food,
was way off to the side.
food
And
trucks are
I
a
think-
bit of a
have 'em on
challenge.
each
Oh,
side.
sorry, George.
I think a lot of people ought to be smart and bring their own.
Yeah, because food trucks for us are a problem in the sense that a lot of our event success has been in recent years. And so a lot of these food truck vendors want to see sustained numbers because they're fearful or they want guarantees. And so in some of these events, we've had to provide them guarantees just to get the ones we've gotten. And so what a guarantee means is we say, we know you're going to sell $1,000 worth of food. And if you don't, we'll actually pay the difference. And so we don't
Yeah.
want to do that. And as our events are bigger, we want to get to a point where we say to the food truck, no,
Yeah.
you have the privilege of coming. You
Yeah.
have to apply to us. But
I agree.
that takes a few years of
Yeah.
repetitive stability, and we're
Well-
getting there, but we're not there yet.
Hopefully with this year and the issues of COVID, they might relax that somewhat for us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any
Thank
other questions?
I love the creative problem
Great.
solving.
Me too.
Great.
Very good.
Councilmember Nakamura just asked about Saturday, and we had an example, we had 3 food trucks Saturday, and I know one of them didn't make the minimum. And so you have this real, but they were happy, they did well, but you have this, diversity of interest, and so for us, it's about kind of finding a way to find some common ground, and these events need that ongoing consistency to get there.
I noticed that at the truck.
Yeah. Sorry.
Very good, thank you very much.
Fantastic idea.
Next item is discussion of North Central Texas Council of Governments Regional Transportation Council member representative. So it's in the packet. The way this works is, this is the RTC committee. And so the different cities get to appoint a representative and an alternate representative. And we're grouped with Hearst, Euless, Bedford, Grapevine, Southlake, Westlake, Trophy Club, and Roanoke. So we all share one seat. And so every 2 years, we get the opportunity to nominate somebody and vote for somebody. And so it's a weighted vote of those cities. And so what happens, the mayors, recommend, or cities throw out names. And so what's been thrown out this year by several of those mayors is that the current Euless Mayor Pro Tem Jeremy Tompkins is the current representative, and Nick Sanders, Trophy Club mayor, is the alternate. And so there's pretty much right now, what I've seen just in emails that come to me is pretty much it's going to be a majority of those cities, I think, that go for those guys. And I have no issue. I mean, I'm fine with those individuals
Yep.
also, if you guys are. Okay.
Yeah,
I'll-
I'm fine.
Okay, and I'll send a note saying we're good with him too. That'll be done. The next, the last agenda items are just regular city council comments, and tonight we have a long agenda. A lot of ordinances, first reading ordinances. We have still the Bluebonnet ordinances. There are 2 of them that are tabled. We're still not ready to take those off the table, so they'll remain tabled. However, we have 2 resolutions that are tabled, and I believe we'll probably take both of those off the table and deal with them tonight. So, question, Adrian, or comment? Nope.
I was just looking over to see if you all received the withdrawal email.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, item 5G, which is
Yep.
the accessory
Yep.
structure.
Now we know who that is.
George has
Paul
got a
Johnson,
cat.
that we received notification of withdrawal.
Withdrawal, so they're completely withdrawing that case.
The accessory building on Hall
Hal
Johnson.
Johnson's
5G.
withdrawing, went through P and Z, and this
Yes,
was
sir.
our first reading, so they're pulling it.
Yes,
Okay.
Mr. Primrose.
Yeah.
Well, and the question was, how does that work?
Yeah.
If he withdraws his application, currently that building is not yet received its occupancy permit. If it receives an occupancy permit, which it is ready to do, the front building, which is the smaller, traditionally residential home, would have to be vacated and can only be an accessory structure, and then must maintain the standards as an accessory structure,
Right.
not an accessory dwelling or dwelling unit. And that would be in line with the permitted approval that was granted previously and the
Yes.
codes in place.
So this particular applicant has always said he didn't plan to do that. Is he pulling this with the idea that he can reapply again?
I don't believe so. That-
Because he's, yeah,
I don't know, but I don't believe so. His indication to me when he spoke with me last week was that he implied he may pull it, but the correspondence we received via email a short time ago just simply said, I'm withdrawing the application, did not explain.
all right, so I
What
got a
is the
question
steps?
for city attorney now. What are the rules? Well, I postulate that the applicant did not get the decision they wanted in P and Z. He had completely reapplied, pulled the previous one, reapplied, went through the whole process, P and Z, didn't get the result he wanted, so it's now gets to us. He's pulling it. Can he turn around and reapply?
I want to make two comments on this, Mayor and Council. Number one, I don't want to get into the discussion at this point in the work session because we haven't posted this as
Okay,
an item.
then we'll talk about it later.
Right.
No problem.
But we will answer that question during the regular meeting.
Yeah, okay, no problem, thank you. That's all I had about the regular agenda. Anybody else comment? Okay, then, if not, I want to close the work session. Work session's closed, and we're going to be moving into executive session in accordance with the Texas Government Code, Chapter 551, Subchapter D, Section 551.071 Legal, Section 551.072 Real Estate, Section 551.074 Personnel, and Section 551.087 Economic Development. So we're now in executive session, and we're moving to the executive conference room. Thanks.
This is very loud. I didn't know that until I sat here.